Imagine waking before the sun, not to an alarm, but to darkness, cold air, and the sound of animals waiting outside.
You are a medieval farmer, and your workday has already begun.
Before breakfast, before daylight, and before the village stirs, there are fields to prepare and animals to feed.
Tonight, we will quietly follow every hour of this forgotten life, and by the end, you may wonder how anyone survived a single farming season. Each hour matters.
A missed task becomes tomorrow's trouble. The cottage is still dark when you open your eyes.
A thin blanket lies over the straw mattress, while the last warmth from yesterday's fire has almost disappeared.
There is no clock to tell you the time.
Instead, the darkness itself is your signal.
Somewhere outside, a rooster calls, animals shift in their shelter, and another long day waits beyond the wooden door. Slowly, you rise, knowing the fields will not wait for you. One mistake could affect the animals, crops, and food later in the year. Before stepping outside, the family begins with the smallest tasks. Someone stirs the fading fire, another checks the water, and the youngest children remain wrapped in blankets for a few precious moments. Every movement is quiet because the morning is still young. There is no hurry in the modern sense, yet everything must be done. A medieval farm depends on rhythm, and the first rhythm of the day begins beside the hearth. These preparations decide whether the household begins ready.
The farmer dresses in simple clothing made for work rather than comfort. Wool protects against the morning chill, while sturdy shoes help with mud, stones, and rough paths.
There are no bright machines waiting outside, no engine starting in the distance, and no easy way to replace a damaged tool.
The farmer carries what the day requires, knowing that every task will depend on patience, physical strength, and careful attention to the land.
A broken tool could turn a morning into extra work. At last, the wooden door opens, and the cold morning air enters the cottage. Outside, the farm slowly emerges from darkness. Fences, sheds, animals, and distant fields appear beneath the first pale light.
The village remains quiet, but the farmer is already moving.
The day will bring feeding, ploughing, carrying, planting, and countless small decisions.
For now, there is only the silence before sunrise and the long road toward another working day.
The peaceful scene hides how demanding this life.
The first responsibility is often the animals.
Before the farmer can think about the fields, cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens need attention. Feed must be carried, water checked, and shelters inspected for damage.
A sick or hungry animal is more than a problem.
It can threaten the household's food and income.
In the dim morning light, these quiet chores begin the day.
Nothing feels dramatic, yet every small task matters because the farm depends upon many living things. Water is another early concern. A household may depend on a nearby well, stream, or carefully stored supply, and carrying it is physical work in itself. The farmer fills wooden buckets and brings enough water for the family and animals. There are no pipes waiting inside the cottage, so a simple drink requires effort.
In the stillness before sunrise, the repeated sound of footsteps and wooden handles becomes part of the farm's familiar morning rhythm. Once the animals are settled, attention turns toward the fields.
The farmer looks across the dark ground, thinking about what must be done when daylight arrives. Perhaps a field needs ploughing, weeds must be removed, or young crops need careful attention. The work changes with the season, but the responsibility never disappears. Every field represents food for the household, and every successful harvest begins with these quiet decisions made long before the first meal.
The sky slowly changes from black to deep blue, and the first light reaches the edges of the village.
Smoke rises gently from cottage roofs as other families begin their own morning routines. There is no single moment when the entire community wakes.
Instead, life gradually returns through small sounds, footsteps, animals, doors, and distant voices.
The farmer watches the light grow stronger, knowing that soon the peaceful fields will become a place of continuous labor. Before leaving for the fields, the family takes a brief moment to prepare something simple to eat.
There may be yesterday's bread, a little cheese, pottage, or another seasonal food. Nothing is elaborate, because the meal is meant to provide enough strength for the work ahead. The farmer eats slowly, but without lingering.
Outside, daylight is arriving, and the farm is beginning to move. Another long day has quietly started, almost unnoticed by the sleeping world.
The farmer steps beyond the cottage as the morning light finally reaches the fields. The air is cool, and damp grass brushes against one's shoes.
Nearby, an ox waits beside the plough, already part of the day's work.
There is no engine, no easy shortcut, and no promise that the weather will cooperate. Every task must be completed with patience and strength.
For a medieval farmer,
The land is not simply a workplace. It is the source of food, security, and the family's hope for another year. Quietly, the path toward the fields is familiar, but each morning carries its own uncertainty. A farmer may already be thinking about yesterday's rain, the condition of the soil, or whether the crops are growing as expected. Small signs matter. A broken fence, missing animal, or damaged plant can become a serious problem later. As the sun rises higher, the quiet landscape begins to reveal its details. The farmer studies the land carefully, because knowing the farm is almost as important as working it. By now, the village is fully awake. Smoke rolls upward from cottage chimneys. Animals make their morning sounds, and workers begin moving toward fields, workshops, and roads. Yet the farmer's day is only beginning. There will be hours of lifting, digging, carrying, guiding animals, and working the soil. Much of this labor is repetitive, but repetition is what keeps a household alive. The same careful movements, repeated season after season, form the hidden rhythm of medieval rural life. Quietly, the work begins slowly, then settles into a steady rhythm. The farmer grips the wooden handles of the plough while the oxen pull forward through the earth. Each furrow must be straight enough and deep enough for the season's needs. The soil is heavy, especially after rain, and the wooden equipment offers little comfort. Still, the farmer continues. There is no machine to finish the field later. The strength of human hands and animals is the technology that carries the work forward. Each day, as the morning continues, the farmer's body begins to feel the effort. Hands grow rough, shoulders become tired, and clothing gathers dust and soil. Yet there is little time to think about discomfort. The fields demand attention while daylight is available. Somewhere behind the farmer, the cottage and family remain connected to this work. Every furrow, every seed, and every repaired fence contributes to the household's future. The ordinary morning becomes a chapter in a life built around land. The morning sun now hangs above the fields, revealing rows of earth stretching toward the horizon. From a distance, the farm looks peaceful, almost timeless. But beneath that peaceful view is a demanding reality. Every hour of daylight matters, especially during planting and harvest. The farmer cannot simply stop when tired. There are animals to guide, soil to turn, and crops that depend upon careful timing. In this world, nature sets the schedule, and the farmer must follow it. A small mistake in the morning can become a much larger problem months later. Planting too early, working wet soil, damaging young crops, or neglecting an animal could affect the household's future food supply. Medieval farmers therefore relied heavily on experience. Knowledge passed from parents to children helped them understand seasons, soil, weather, and animals. Much of this wisdom was never written down. It lived in memory, observation, and the quiet repetition of everyday work. The farmer pauses briefly and looks across the land. Beyond the fields are meadows, woodland, and the distant village. There are no highways, power lines, or modern buildings breaking the horizon. The landscape feels enormous and quiet. Yet this peaceful countryside is not empty. It is carefully used for crops, grazing, firewood, water, and wild resources. Almost everything around the farmer has a purpose, because wasting useful land or food could be dangerous. As the morning moves toward midday, the farmer has already completed more work than many modern people might expect before lunch. The body is warm now, the hands are dusty, and the early chill has disappeared. Still, the day's labor is far from finished. There will be more hours in the fields before evening arrives. For now, the farmer continues beneath the growing sun, following the same ancient rhythm that generations before had followed. And so, our first morning on the medieval farm comes gently toward its midpoint. The village is fully awake, the animals are moving, and the fields stretch beneath the brightening sky. What began in darkness has become a full working day. Yet this is only the beginning. Ahead lies the harder labor of farming, the simple meals that fuel it, and the seasonal challenges that can determine whether a family thrives or struggles through the year. Before the farmer returns to the fields, there is one quiet necessity: food. A medieval morning meal was rarely large or luxurious, but it had an important purpose. After waking before sunrise and beginning the day's chores, the farmer needed enough strength to continue working for hours. Tonight, we will sit beside that simple wooden table and discover what an ordinary farmer might have eaten before another long day beneath the medieval sky. The meal is humble, but its story. On the wooden table sits a loaf of coarse bread, perhaps made from rye, barley, or wheat depending on the region and the family's resources. The crust is firm, and the inside is dense compared with the soft bread familiar today. For many medieval households,
Bread was one of the most dependable sources of daily nourishment. It could be eaten alone, dipped into a stew, or saved for later.
A simple loaf could quietly carry a family through hours of demanding work.
Beside the bread might be a warm bowl of pottage, a simple dish made by slowly cooking grains, vegetables, peas, beans, herbs, or whatever ingredients were available. There was no single recipe because medieval food changed with the season and the household's resources.
One day, the pot might be thick and filling.
Another day, it could be much thinner. The same cooking pot served again and again, quietly transforming simple ingredients into something warm enough to begin a difficult morning.
A drink might also accompany the meal.
Clean drinking water was not always easily available, so many people consumed weak ale or other fermented drinks, depending on local custom and availability.
The drink was not necessarily strong or intoxicating.
Often, it was simply part of everyday life.
A farmer could take a few quiet mouthfuls, share the meal with family, and then return to work. There was little ceremony.
Breakfast existed mainly to provide strength for the long hours ahead.
The family eats together while the morning light slowly enters the cottage.
Children may receive smaller portions, while adults prepare for the work waiting outside.
Nothing is wasted. A crust can be saved, leftover pottage can become another meal, and every useful ingredient has value. In a world where the next harvest is never guaranteed, a simple breakfast is more than food.
It is a small reserve of energy, carefully consumed before another demanding day begins. The ingredients on a medieval table depended heavily on where the family lived and what the season provided.
A farmer near fertile farmland might have access to better grain, while another household could rely more heavily on oats, barley, beans, or vegetables. There was no supermarket waiting nearby and no easy way to buy whatever was desired.
Food began with the land, the weather, and the family's own ability to produce or obtain it.
Every meal reflected those limits.
Vegetables added variety to an otherwise simple diet. Cabbage, onions, leeks, peas, beans, turnips, and other locally available plants could find their way into the cooking pot. Some were eaten fresh when the season allowed, while others were stored or preserved for colder months. The farmer did not think of these foods as part of a special diet. They were simply useful ingredients, grown close to home and transformed into filling meals with very little waste.
Meat was a different story.
Contrary to some popular images of medieval life, ordinary peasants did not necessarily eat large portions of meat every day. Livestock was valuable, and animals could provide milk, eggs, wool, labor, or future breeding stock.
A family might eat pork, poultry, fish, or other meat when circumstances allowed, especially during certain seasons or celebrations.
For many households, meat was something to appreciate rather than an everyday luxury. The farmer's breakfast also reflected the uncertainty of the agricultural year. During a successful harvest, there might be enough grain and preserved food to make meals more satisfying. After a poor harvest, the same family could face smaller portions and fewer choices. Food was therefore closely connected to weather, soil, pests, and luck. Every mouthful carried the invisible story of months of work that had already taken place in the fields.
When the meal finally ends, the wooden bowls are set aside and the farmer prepares to return outside.
There is little time for a long rest.
The morning is already moving forward, and daylight is precious.
A final piece of bread may be wrapped for later, while the remaining food is carefully saved.
Then the farmer steps back toward the fields, carrying not only tools, but the energy needed for many more hours of medieval farm work. Back outside, the farmer carries the quiet warmth of breakfast into the cool morning air. The meal may have seemed ordinary, but those few bites provide the energy needed for hours of physical labor.
There is no quick snack waiting in a pocket and no convenient shop along the road.
If the farmer becomes hungry later, the solution must come from whatever was prepared or carried from home. Every meal is planned around the demands of the working day. Bread remains especially important because it can travel easily and survive for days when stored properly. A farmer might carry a piece into the fields, wrapping it in cloth or simply keeping it close at hand.
During a break, the bread could be eaten alone or combined with cheese, vegetables, or leftovers.
It was simple food, but it was dependable.
In a world where hunger could follow a poor harvest, dependable food was one of the household's greatest forms of security.
The cooking pot also tells a story about medieval family life.
Instead of preparing completely separate dishes for every meal, households often relied on ingredients that could simmer together for a long time. Beans, grains, vegetables, herbs, and other available foods could slowly become a filling pottage.
The pot saved effort and helped stretch limited supplies.
Even a small amount of food could become something substantial when combined with water, patience, and careful cooking. Food preparation was closely connected to the changing seasons. Spring brought fresh greens and new growth, while summer offered a wider variety of vegetables and fruits. Autumn was a time of gathering and storing, when families worked to preserve enough food for the colder months.
Winter narrowed the choices again. What appeared in the morning bowl was therefore a reflection of the entire agricultural calendar, quietly connecting the farmer's breakfast to the fields outside. For the medieval farmer, eating was never completely separate from survival. Every loaf depended on grain, every vegetable depended on soil, and every stored food depended on careful preparation. A simple breakfast connected the family to months of work that had come before and months of uncertainty still ahead. Once the final bite is finished, the farmer returns to the fields, carrying the strength of a humble meal into another long morning beneath the medieval sky. As the farmer walks back toward the fields, the morning meal begins to feel like a distant moment.
The warmth of the cottage is gone, replaced by cool air and the smell of damp earth. Yet the simple food has done its work. A few pieces of bread, a bowl of pottage, and perhaps a drink have provided enough energy to continue. There is nothing luxurious about the meal, but it fits perfectly into a life shaped by hard work, limited resources, and the changing seasons.
The farmer may carry a small portion of food for later, especially when the day's work takes the family far from home.
A piece of bread is easy to transport and does not require special preparation in the field.
During a short pause, the farmer can sit beneath a tree, beside a fence, or at the edge of a field and take a few quiet bites.
Even these brief moments of eating are connected to the land and the work surrounding them.
What makes the medieval meal fascinating is how little was truly wasted. A hard piece of bread could soften inside a stew, vegetable scraps could add flavor to a pot, and leftovers might become part of the next meal. Preserving food was not simply a tradition, it was practical survival. When winter arrived and fresh crops disappeared, the careful choices made during warmer months could determine how comfortably a family passed through the cold season.
The farmer's breakfast may seem extremely simple when compared with a modern American morning. There are no refrigerators filled with choices, no packaged cereals, and no quick restaurant waiting nearby. Yet the meal serves an important purpose. It provides nourishment while using what the household can produce, store, or obtain locally. In that sense, the breakfast is a perfect reflection of medieval life. Modest, practical, seasonal, and completely connected to the surrounding countryside. The final traces of breakfast disappear as the farmer returns fully to the day's work.
The wooden bowl remains behind in the cottage, perhaps waiting to be washed and used again later. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, and the fields are already calling. The peaceful breakfast chapter is over, but the harder part of the farming day is only beginning. Soon, the farmer will face the soil, the animals, and the ancient tools that keep the entire household alive.
Imagine standing in a medieval field with nothing but a wooden plow, a pair of strong oxen, and thousands of pounds of stubborn earth between you and your family's next harvest. There is no tractor waiting nearby, no engine to make the work easier, and no second chance if the season goes badly.
As the sun rises, the farmer takes hold of the plow.
What happens next reveals just how physically demanding ordinary farming once was.
The farmer guides the oxen forward, slowly cutting the first furrow into the soil. The wooden plow is simple, heavy, and difficult to control, especially when the ground is hard or wet. Every few moments, the farmer must adjust its direction and depth.
The work looks almost peaceful from a distance, but up close it demands constant strength and attention.
One long row becomes another, and gradually the quiet field begins to change beneath the farmer's hands. The soil itself determines how difficult the morning will become. After rain, the earth may cling heavily to the plow, while dry ground can become hard and resistant.
The farmer has learned to read these conditions through experience, watching the weather and feeling the soil beneath the tools.
Centuries before modern agricultural machines, this knowledge was essential. A farmer who understood the land could work with it, rather than simply fighting against it.
The oxen are just as important as the farmer.
Their steady strength pulls the plow through ground that would be almost impossible to turn by hand for long periods. The farmer must guide them with familiar commands and gestures, keeping their pace steady across the field. If an animal becomes frightened, tired, or injured, the entire rhythm of the work can stop. On a medieval farm, human effort and animal strength are closely connected. As another furrow appears, the morning grows brighter around the farmer.
Birds move through the hedges, distant cottages become clearer, and the village slowly disappears behind the rising light. Yet there is little time to admire the peaceful scenery.
The field must be prepared while the season is right. Every row brings the farmer closer to planting, and every hour of work carries the quiet hope of a successful harvest. This is farming before machines change the rhythm of the countryside.
Once the first furrows are complete, the farmer continues across the field with the same steady rhythm.
The work is repetitive, but every movement has a purpose.
The soil must be turned, broken, and prepared before seeds can be placed into the ground. There is no shortcut. The farmer watches the oxen, checks the plow, and studies the earth with every pass. For generations of medieval families, this quiet labor was the foundation of survival.
After plowing comes the careful preparation of the soil.
Clumps of earth must be broken apart, weeds removed, and the surface made suitable for planting. A simple hoe, rake, or other hand tool may become essential during this stage. The farmer works slowly across the field, bending, lifting, and repeating the same movements. To a modern viewer, the process may look almost painfully slow.
To the medieval farmer, it is simply another necessary part of the season. The farmer also watches the sky.
Clouds can bring welcome rain, but too much rain can damage freshly prepared fields.
A sudden storm may wash away soil or delay planting, while a long dry period can leave the ground difficult to work. Without modern forecasts, farmers depended on experience, local knowledge, and careful observation. The shape of clouds, the direction of wind, and the condition of the soil could all influence decisions made during an ordinary morning.
As the work continues, other members of the household may join the farmer. Medieval farming was rarely the responsibility of one person alone. Family members could carry tools, gather weeds, tend animals, spread seed, or complete smaller tasks nearby. Children also learned by watching and helping when their age allowed. From morning onward, farming became a shared effort, with each person contributing something toward the household's future food supply. By late morning, the field looks completely different from the quiet ground seen at sunrise.
Long furrows stretch across the earth, the oxen are beginning to tire, and the farmer's hands have grown rough with work.
Yet the day's most important tasks are still ahead.
Seeds must eventually enter this prepared soil, and the success of that process will depend on weather, timing, and patience.
For now, the farmer pauses only briefly before continuing across the field.
The farmer reaches the edge of another section of the field and begins again.
The wooden plow cuts through the earth while the oxen move forward at a patient pace. There is something almost meditative about the repetition. Step, pull, turn, and begin again.
Yet this calm rhythm hides enormous physical effort.
Hours of work must be completed before the day grows too hot, and the farmer knows that every furrow represents part of the family's future food.
The condition of the field can also reveal what happened during the previous season.
Hard ground may suggest dry weather, while deep mud can make animals struggle to pull the plow. Stones must sometimes be removed by hand, and troublesome weeds can compete with crops for precious nutrients. Medieval farmers learned these details through years of observation. Long before modern agricultural science, practical knowledge was passed quietly from one generation to another through daily experience.
Near the field, another farmer may be working on a neighboring plot.
Medieval villages often depended on cooperation as well as individual effort.
Neighbors could share animals, tools, labor, or knowledge when circumstances required it.
A broken plow or exhausted ox could create a serious problem for one household. Helping each other could make difficult seasons more manageable.
Across the quiet countryside, countless farmers followed similar routines, working side by side without realizing.
The farmer now checks the soil one more time before continuing. The earth must be prepared carefully because seeds placed into poor ground may struggle to grow. There is no guarantee of success.
Even after weeks of labor, a late frost, heavy rain, drought, or pests could damage the crop.
Still, the farmer continues because there is no alternative.
Hope is part of the work. Every seed planted carries a quiet expectation that months later, the field will return something valuable. The sun is now higher, and the peaceful morning has become a long stretch of labor. The farmer's shoulders ache, the oxen breathe heavily, and the once cool air has begun to warm.
Yet the field slowly takes shape beneath their combined effort.
From a modern perspective, the progress may appear painfully slow. To the medieval farmer, this is simply the natural rhythm of agriculture.
There is no race against a machine, only patience, endurance, and the steady movement of time.
A brief pause finally comes as the farmer stops the oxen and looks across the field. From here, the landscape seems almost endless.
Other farmers are working in the distance, each following the same seasonal rhythm. There is no modern machinery breaking the silence, Only the sounds of animals, soil, wind, and human voices.
For a moment, the scene feels peaceful, but beneath that calm is a simple truth. If the work stops for too long, the harvest may suffer.
The farmer takes hold of the plough again and guides the oxen forward.
The wooden frame presses into the earth, leaving another dark line behind.
Slowly, one furrow becomes dozens.
The process requires patience because the farmer cannot force the animals to move faster than they can manage. A steady pace is safer and more effective.
This simple cooperation between human, animal, and soil is at the heart of medieval agriculture, repeated countless times across generations. By late morning, the farmer has learned exactly how the field feels beneath the plough.
Certain patches are softer, others harder, and some may contain stones that interrupt the work. These small differences matter.
The farmer adjusts the direction and pressure of the tool, using experience rather than written instructions.
This knowledge may have been learned from a parent years earlier.
In medieval farming, education often happened directly in the field, through observation.
The morning's labor also reminds us how closely medieval families depended on nature. A farmer could work perfectly and still lose everything to weather, insects, disease, or poor soil. There were no modern fertilizers, tractors, or insurance systems to provide an easy solution. The farmer could only prepare carefully, watch the sky, and hope the season remained favorable.
That uncertainty followed every furrow, making ordinary agricultural work both peaceful and quietly dangerous.
At last, the morning field has been transformed.
Behind the farmer, long furrows stretch across the earth, while the oxen stand quietly, breathing after their effort. The farmer wipes the dust from tired hands and prepares for the next task. Soon there will be another meal, more work, and another stretch of daylight. But this morning has already revealed something important. Medieval farming was not simply a job. It was a daily negotiation with land, animals, weather, and time.
Imagine trying to feed an entire family with tools that could fit in your hands. No tractor, no gasoline engine, and no machine waiting to finish the field when your body became exhausted.
A medieval farmer had only simple equipment, animals, and hard-earned experience. Yet these humble tools could transform stubborn earth into fields capable of feeding a village.
Tonight, we slow down and discover the remarkable technology hidden inside the ordinary tools of a medieval farm. The wooden plough was one of the farmer's most important tools. Its design was simple, but using it required strength and skill. Pulled by oxen or sometimes horses, the plough opened the soil so seeds could eventually be planted.
The farmer walked behind it, guiding its direction while keeping the animals moving steadily forward. Every field demanded countless passes, and every pass left another line in the earth. Slowly, simple wood and human effort reshaped the countryside.
Some ploughs became more effective when fitted with an iron ploughshare.
This stronger cutting edge could penetrate heavier soils and last longer than wood alone.
Iron was valuable, however, and producing useful metal required skilled blacksmiths and considerable labor. A farmer could not simply replace a damaged piece whenever convenient.
Tools had to be maintained carefully because a broken part could interrupt an entire day's work.
In this world, good equipment was something to protect, repair. The sickle was another essential tool, especially when crops were ready to harvest.
Its curved blade allowed farmers to cut grain and grasses by hand, gathering small bundles as they moved through the field.
Harvesting required patience because the work had to be completed before bad weather damaged the crop.
Imagine standing beneath a summer sky, bending again and again with a sickle in hand.
It was slow work, but the future of the household depended on finishing it. The hoe may appear simple, yet it was incredibly useful. Farmers could use it to loosen soil, remove weeds, shape planting areas, and care for crops between larger farming tasks. Unlike the plough, the hoe depended almost entirely on human strength. A farmer might spend hours bending, lifting, striking the soil, and repeating the same movement. From a modern perspective, the process seems exhausting.
For medieval families, however, these simple tools were essential parts of everyday survival.
The scythe became especially valuable when large areas of grass or grain needed to be cut quickly.
Its long curved blade allowed a skilled worker to cover more ground with each swing than a small sickle could manage. Yet using it efficiently required practice, strength, and careful movement. A poorly handled blade could cause injury, while a dull edge made the work even harder.
On a medieval farm, learning to use a tool properly was almost as important as owning it. The rake was another quiet but useful tool around a farm. After cutting grass or gathering crops, farmers could use it to collect scattered material and prepare the ground. It was simple compared with modern machinery, but its usefulness came from repetition. A farmer moved across the field again and again, gathering what would otherwise be lost. Nothing valuable was casually abandoned. Grass could become animal feed, while leftover plant material might return to the soil or serve another. The wooden cart helped farmers move things that would have been extremely difficult to carry by hand. Grain, hay, firewood, tools, stones, and other supplies could be loaded onto a cart and pulled by animals. The journey might be slow, especially across muddy or uneven paths, but the cart multiplied what one household could transport. Roads were often rough, and wheels could break, so farmers learned to maintain both the cart and the animals that made transportation possible. Behind every important farming tool stood another skilled worker, the blacksmith. Iron had to be heated, shaped, repaired, and sharpened by hand. A farmer might bring a damaged plowshare, worn blade, or broken metal fitting to the forge and depend on the blacksmith to restore it. The sound of hammer striking hot iron could therefore become part of village life. Farming and metalworking were closely connected, because good tools could save time and make difficult work possible. Tools also had to be cared for when the working day ended. Wooden handles could crack, iron blades could become dull, and leather straps could wear out. Farmers cleaned, sharpened, repaired, and stored equipment, because replacing a useful tool was not always easy. A carefully maintained plow or sickle could remain in service for years. In medieval agriculture, the value of a tool was not measured by how advanced it looked, but by how reliably it helped a family survive. The tools of a medieval farm were simple, but they were designed around practical needs. A farmer did not need dozens of specialized machines. Instead, a small collection of reliable tools could perform many different jobs throughout the year. The same wooden handle might serve different purposes, while blades could be sharpened and reused. This simplicity made farming possible for ordinary families, even when money and materials were limited. Every useful tool earned its place through years. Wood was everywhere on a medieval farm, making it one of the most important materials for everyday equipment. Handles, carts, fences, buckets, plow components, and other objects could be made from locally available timber. But wood was not indestructible. Rain, mud, constant pressure, and repeated use slowly weakened it. Farmers therefore needed to understand how to repair and replace wooden parts. A skilled woodworker could be just as valuable to a rural community as a blacksmith. Iron changed what farmers could accomplish, but it was never something to waste. A strong iron blade could cut soil, grass, or grain more effectively than a simple wooden edge. Yet iron required skilled labor and fuel to produce, making metal tools valuable possessions. Farmers protected their blades from unnecessary damage and brought them to the blacksmith when sharpening or repairs were needed. A single well-maintained piece of iron could quietly support years of agricultural work. Some of the most important technology on a medieval farm was not a tool at all, but the animal pulling it. Oxen provided the steady strength needed for plowing and transportation. Horses could also be used where circumstances and resources allowed. Training and caring for these animals required time, food, and attention. When an animal worked well with its owner, the partnership became remarkably efficient. Human knowledge guided the equipment, while animal strength supplied much of the power. Imagine standing beside a medieval field and watching this entire system working together. A farmer guides the plow, an ox pulls forward, an iron edge cuts the earth, and simple wooden equipment carries supplies from one place to another. Nothing looks modern, yet every part has a purpose. This was the technology that fed villages for generations. It depended not on speed, but on endurance, maintenance, skilled hands, and a deep understanding of how the countryside worked. The value of a farming tool was also measured by the time it could save. A sharper blade meant fewer difficult strokes, while a stronger plowshare could make heavy soil easier to work. Even a simple cart could reduce hours of carrying by hand. These small advantages mattered across an entire season. When hundreds of tasks had to be repeated, a well-made tool could make the difference between finishing on time and falling behind. Medieval technology was often quiet, practical. Farmers also adapted their tools to the changing seasons. The equipment needed for planting was not always the same as what was needed during harvest. In spring, plows and hoes were especially important. In summer and autumn, sickles, scythes, carts, and storage equipment became more valuable. Once winter arrived, tools might be repaired and prepared for another year. The farm therefore followed a cycle in which equipment, animals, land, and human labor all changed together.
A broken tool could create a problem far larger than it first appeared.
If a plough failed during an important period, planting might be delayed.
If a sickle broke during harvest, valuable crops could remain exposed to rain or wind.
This is why farmers took repairs seriously.
They learned basic maintenance themselves and depended on local craftsmen for difficult work.
Every tool represented time, materials, and labor, so keeping it useful was part of the farmer's responsibility. When evening eventually arrived, these tools did not simply disappear into a shed.
The farmer would often clean away mud, check blades, repair handles, and place equipment where it would remain protected from weather. Tomorrow's work depended partly on today's preparation.
The process was simple but important.
Before modern factories could produce cheap replacements, a farmer had to care for almost everything personally. A well-maintained tool could become a familiar companion through many.
And so, the medieval farm's technology begins to look different from the way we might imagine it.
There were no roaring engines or complicated machines, yet the countryside was filled with carefully developed solutions.
Wooden ploughs, iron blades, carts, hoes, scythes, and the strength of working animals formed a system that could feed entire communities.
It was slow, demanding, and deeply dependent on human skill. But for centuries, these humble tools quietly shaped the landscape and the lives.
Imagine waking before sunrise and realizing that your family's survival depends on animals you cannot afford to lose.
An ox can pull the plough, a cow can provide milk, and a few chickens can provide eggs. But sickness, injury, or hunger can change everything.
On a medieval farm, animals were not simply possessions. They were workers, food sources, and living forms of wealth.
Tonight, we quietly enter the farmyard and discover why these animals mattered so much to everyday medieval life. The ox was one of the most important animals on many medieval farms. Strong, patient, and capable of pulling heavy equipment, oxen provided the power needed for ploughing difficult soil.
A farmer had to know the animal well, watching its strength, pace, and health throughout the working day. The relationship was practical but also familiar. Without a healthy team of oxen, preparing the fields could become far more difficult, and an entire season's work might fall behind.
Cows served another important purpose. Beyond their value as livestock, they could provide milk that became part of the household's daily food. Milk could also be transformed into butter, cheese, or other preserved products that lasted longer than fresh milk. A productive cow therefore offered more than one benefit. For a medieval family, caring for such an animal was an investment in future meals and household security, especially when other sources of food were limited. Sheep were valuable for reasons that went beyond meat. Their wool could be spun into yarn and turned into clothing, blankets, and other useful materials. In colder seasons, good wool could make the difference between enduring the weather and suffering through it. Sheep also required regular care, grazing, and protection from predators. On a quiet medieval farm, a flock moving across a meadow might look peaceful, but each animal represented resources that the household depended upon.
Then there were the smaller animals that filled the farmyard with constant movement. Chickens could provide eggs and occasional meat, while pigs could turn scraps and natural food into valuable pork. Goats were useful where conditions were less suitable for cattle. Each animal occupied its own place within the household economy. Nothing existed simply for decoration. The medieval farm was a living system, and the farmer's daily work was to keep that system healthy, productive, and ready.
Caring for animals began early in the morning and continued throughout the day.
They needed fresh water, food, clean shelter, and protection from weather and predators. A farmer could not simply leave livestock unattended for long periods. Their health directly affected the household's future. In winter, feeding animals could consume precious stored grain and hay, while during summer they depended more heavily on pasture. Every season brought different responsibilities for keeping.
The animals also produced something the household could use without immediately killing them. Cows could provide milk, sheep could provide wool, and chickens could provide eggs. These resources could be consumed directly or transformed into other useful goods. Milk might become cheese or butter, while wool could become warm clothing.
This made healthy livestock extremely valuable.
A medieval farmer therefore had good reason to protect productive animals and keep them healthy for as long.
Even manure had an important purpose. Animal waste could be collected and returned to the fields, helping improve the soil and supporting future crops.
Nothing useful was casually thrown away. The farm worked as a cycle, with animals feeding on crops or pasture and later contributing something back to the land.
To modern eyes, this may seem simple, but it was an important form of practical sustainability.
The farmer was constantly moving resources from one part of the farm to another.
Animals could also become a source of worry.
A sudden illness might spread through livestock, while a predator could threaten sheep or chickens during the night.
Farmers had to notice changes in behavior, appetite, movement, or appearance. Without modern veterinary medicine, treatment options were limited, so prevention and careful observation mattered greatly. A farmer might spend part of the evening checking the animals, listening to their sounds, and making sure nothing seemed unusual. The bond between farmer and animal was therefore built through thousands of ordinary moments.
Feeding, guiding, cleaning, milking, repairing fences, and protecting livestock all required patience.
The animals knew familiar voices and routines, while the farmer learned their individual habits. In the quiet countryside, this relationship became part of everyday life.
The farm could not function through human effort alone. It depended on a partnership between people, animals, land.
During planting and harvest, animals became even more important.
Oxen and horses could spend long hours pulling heavy loads, while farmers worked beside them under the changing sky.
Their strength had limits, however, and pushing an animal too far could make it useless when it was needed most.
The farmer therefore had to balance work with rest, food, and water. A healthy animal was not simply helpful.
It could determine whether an important farming task was completed on time.
Winter created another challenge because animals still needed food when the fields could no longer provide fresh pasture. During warmer months, farmers had to prepare hay and other stored feed for the colder season.
Barns and shelters became especially important as temperatures fell.
The farmer entered winter knowing that every bundle of hay represented future survival.
Feed that had been carefully gathered months earlier would now be carried to animals day after day until spring.
Young animals also required special attention.
Calves, lambs, piglets, and chicks could be vulnerable to cold, illness, and predators. A farmer might spend extra time checking shelters and making sure the smallest animals were safe.
Their future value could be significant, especially for families trying to maintain a productive herd.
Watching a young animal grow was therefore both practical and hopeful.
It represented another source of milk, wool, eggs, labor, or food in the years ahead.
Animals could sometimes be sold or exchanged when a family needed other goods.
A healthy animal might represent considerable wealth in a rural economy where money was limited.
Farmers could trade livestock, animal products, grain, labor, or other resources depending on local customs. This meant the farmyard was also part of the wider village economy.
What looked like an ordinary cow, sheep, or pig could quietly connect a household to markets, neighbors, and future opportunities.
As the afternoon settles over the farm, the animals continue their familiar routines. Some graze quietly, others rest in the shade, while chickens move through the yard searching for food.
The farmer watches them almost without thinking, because these sights and sounds have become part of everyday life.
There is something peaceful about the scene.
Yet beneath that calm is a simple truth. The health of these animals is tied directly to the health of the entire household. Toward evening, the farmer makes another quiet inspection of the livestock. Fences are checked, gates are secured, and animals are guided toward their shelters.
A wandering cow or frightened sheep could create trouble after dark. Chickens need protection from foxes and other predators, while larger animals must be kept safe from cold and storms.
These routines may seem ordinary, but they are repeated night after night. Caring for animals is not a single task. It is a responsibility that the farmyard becomes quieter as darkness approaches.
The animals settle into familiar spaces, and the sounds of movement gradually fade. Inside the shelter, hay provides warmth and food, while the farmer listens for anything unusual. A sudden noise can mean an animal is injured, frightened, or being threatened. Without modern lights or alarms, careful listening matters.
The farmer knows the normal sounds of the farm, and anything different may require immediate attention before the night becomes.
For a medieval family, losing an important animal could have consequences far beyond the farmyard.
A dead ox might mean difficult ploughing. Losing a cow could reduce the supply of milk.
A flock affected by disease could remove an important source of wool or food. This is why livestock represented more than simple property. Animals carried future possibilities. Protecting them meant protecting tomorrow's work, tomorrow's meals, and sometimes the family's ability to remain secure through another.
Yet there is also a quieter side to this relationship.
After spending years beside the same animals, a farmer would naturally recognize their habits and temperaments. Certain animals might respond to familiar voices, follow routines, or behave differently from the rest of the herd.
These details became part of daily life.
The medieval farm was not a silent place. It was filled with breathing, footsteps, calls, bells, and the familiar sounds of animals living alongside the people.
As night finally settles over the farm, the animals rest inside their shelters, and the farmer can turn attention toward the household. The day's work with livestock is finished, at least for a few hours. Tomorrow, the same routines will begin again before sunrise. Feeding, guiding, cleaning, watching, and protecting will continue as they have for generations.
In the quiet darkness, it becomes clear that medieval farming was never only about crops. It was a partnership between people and animals. By midday, the farmer has already spent hours working beneath the open sky. The body is tired, the hands are dirty, and the stomach is beginning to remind him that breakfast was a long time ago. But what did a medieval farmer actually eat in the middle of a working day? There was no roadside restaurant, no packed lunch from a modern kitchen, and no refrigerator nearby. Instead, the farmer carried simple food shaped entirely by the season, the farm, and what the household could spare. The midday meal was often simple enough to eat without much preparation.
A piece of bread might be joined by cheese, onions, beans, vegetables, or leftovers from the morning's pottage.
If the family had prepared something more substantial, a portion could be carried from home in a wooden or ceramic container.
The farmer would find a quiet place near the field, sit for a moment, and eat while the animals rested nearby. Even lunch remained connected to the rhythm of work. There was something peaceful about eating outdoors in the medieval countryside.
The farmer might sit beneath a tree, beside a hedge, or near the edge of the field.
Birds moved through the grass while the wind passed over the crops. For a few minutes, the tools remained untouched. The oxen could rest, and the farmer could breathe without rushing. Yet this peaceful pause was temporary. The sun continued moving across the sky, and more work waited beyond the field. For many farmers, rest was not completely separate from work.
While eating, they could watch the animals, inspect the crops, or notice changes in the weather. A dark cloud on the horizon might signal approaching rain. A damaged plant could reveal pests or disease. A loose fence might need attention later. Even during a meal, the farmer remained connected to the farm.
Life moved slowly, but there was always something worth noticing in the land surrounding them.
When the meal is finished, the farmer does not immediately return to the hardest work. A few quiet moments may be spent sitting in the shade, drinking, and allowing tired muscles to recover.
The countryside is bright now, and the morning's coolness has disappeared.
Soon the plough, hoe, or other tools will be needed again. But for this brief moment, the farmer simply rests beneath the open sky, listening to the sounds of animals and wind before another long afternoon begins. The drink accompanying the meal might be water, weak ale, or another locally available drink. What mattered most was replacing some of the fluid lost through hours of physical labor. Working beneath the summer sun could leave a farmer exhausted, especially during planting or harvest. There was no modern bottle carried everywhere, so water and drinks had to be prepared and transported carefully. Even something as ordinary as taking a drink was part of the practical rhythm of medieval farm life. The food itself depended heavily on the season.
During warmer months, fresh vegetables, herbs, fruits, and other local foods could add variety to the meal. In colder months, farmers depended more on stored grains, dried peas and beans, preserved vegetables, cheese, and other foods that could survive winter.
The midday meal therefore changed throughout the year. What a farmer ate in one season might look completely different several months later, even in the same household. Sometimes the meal could be shared with other family members working nearby. A spouse, older child, or relative might bring food from the cottage, or several workers could pause together beside the fields. Conversation remained simple, often focused on the weather, animals, crops, or the work still waiting.
These short gatherings offered more than nourishment. They gave tired people a chance to exchange information and quietly recover before returning to their separate tasks.
The length of the midday break depended on the season and the work that needed to be completed.
During harvest, when crops could be damaged by changing weather, there was little time for a long rest.
During less demanding periods, farmers might have a little more freedom to pause. The medieval workday was therefore flexible in some ways, but always controlled by nature.
The sun, rain, growing crops, and condition of the animals determined when work could begin, pause, and continue. As the short rest comes to an end, the farmer slowly rises and looks across the field. The peaceful meal has provided a little strength, but the afternoon still stretches ahead. Tools are gathered, the animals are prepared, and the farmer returns to the work that cannot wait. The quiet break disappears almost as quickly as it arrived. Under the bright medieval sky, another long stretch of labor begins, while the distant village continues its own slow rhythm.
The afternoon begins with a different kind of energy. The farmer's stomach is no longer empty, but the muscles already feel the weight of the morning.
Tools are lifted again, the oxen are guided forward, and the quiet rhythm of work returns.
There is something almost hypnotic about the repetition.
Step by step, furrow by furrow, the farmer continues beneath the open sky, while the sounds of wind, animals, and distant birds create a natural soundtrack to the working afternoon.
The farmer may now turn toward tasks that require more careful attention than the morning's heavy ploughing. Weeds must be removed, crops inspected, fences checked, or tools repaired. These smaller jobs may appear insignificant, but together they protect the harvest. A single damaged fence could allow animals into a field, while unchecked weeds could compete with young crops.
Medieval farming depended on noticing small problems early, before they became large enough to threaten the households.
The afternoon heat can make even familiar work feel heavier. Without modern shade structures or cooling systems, farmers depended on natural shelter whenever possible. A tree, hedge, or small woodland edge could provide a few moments of relief.
Water was precious, especially during dry weather, so drinking had to be managed carefully.
Still, the farmer continued steadily, knowing that the work of the season could not simply be postponed because the sun had become uncomfortable. Nearby, the animals continue their own afternoon routine.
Oxen may rest between tasks, cattle graze in pasture, and chickens move through the farmyard.
The farmer keeps an eye on them while working, because livestock can wander, become injured, or damage crops if left unchecked.
The farm is a constant collection of moving parts.
Fields, animals, tools, weather, and people must all remain balanced. When one part fails, another part of the household may quickly feel the consequences. As the afternoon slowly advances, the farmer can finally see how much of the day's work has been completed. The field carries fresh marks from the plough. Weeds have been cleared, animals have been tended, and useful repairs have been made.
Yet there is still daylight remaining.
The farmer does not measure the afternoon in minutes or hours. Instead, progress is measured by tasks finished before darkness. The sun itself becomes the quiet clock governing the entire rhythm of rural life. The afternoon light begins to soften as the farmer continues working. The strongest heat of the day slowly passes, and the countryside becomes calmer.
Yet tiredness remains in every movement. The farmer knows that stopping too early could leave important tasks unfinished.
So the work continues at a steady, manageable pace.
There is no need for speed when endurance is what matters. Slowly, the farmer moves from one task to another, following the ancient rhythm of the agricultural day.
A glance toward the sky may now become important. Weather can change quickly, and a farmer must decide whether to continue working or prepare for rain.
Dark clouds could bring welcome water to thirsty crops, but heavy rain might make the fields impossible to work. Experience helps the farmer judge these signs.
Long before weather apps and forecasts, farmers watch clouds, wind, temperature, and the behavior of animals. Nature itself was the calendar, clock, and warning system. The farmer may spend part of the afternoon caring for crops that need special attention. Young plants can be fragile, and weeds may compete with them for water and nutrients.
Working close to the ground requires hours of bending and careful hand movements.
It is slow, quiet work, almost meditative when repeated for long enough.
Yet every plant matters. A healthy row of crops represents future food, while a neglected field can slowly become a serious problem for the household. Eventually, the farmer pauses again, but this time the break is shorter. There is still work remaining before evening, and the light will not last forever.
The animals are checked, tools are gathered, and the next task is chosen.
Perhaps a fence needs repair, firewood must be collected, or supplies need to be carried home. Medieval farming was not one endless task.
It was a long chain of smaller responsibilities, each quietly connected to the family's survival. As the afternoon approaches evening, the farmer looks across the fields one final time.
The land now carries the marks of an entire day's labor.
Furrows stretch through the soil. Animals have been cared for. Crops have been inspected, and tools have done their work. The countryside remains peaceful, but the farmer's body knows how much effort the day has required. Soon the sun will begin to disappear, and the farm will slowly prepare for another quiet evening. Imagine the sun beginning to disappear while you still have animals to feed, tools to collect, fences to check, and a household waiting for you. On a medieval farm, the end of daylight did not mean the end of responsibility.
Before darkness covered the fields, The farmer had to finish the most important tasks and make sure nothing had been forgotten.
Tonight, we follow those final golden hours and discover how a medieval farmer slowly brought another demanding day to an end.
The first task is often checking the animals before bringing them closer to shelter.
Cattle may be guided from pasture, sheep gathered together, and smaller animals watch carefully as daylight fades.
The farmer knows that darkness creates new dangers.
Animals can wander, fences become harder to see, and predators become more difficult to notice. So the evening routine begins while there is still enough light to move safely around the farmyard and surrounding fields.
The farmer then turns attention toward the tools scattered around the day's work. A plough may still be resting beside the field, while hoes, sickles, ropes, and wooden equipment need to be gathered.
Leaving tools outdoors exposes them to rain, theft, and unnecessary damage. Each item has value because replacing it takes time and skilled labor.
Slowly, the farmer carries everything back toward the storage area, preparing the equipment for another morning before sunrise.
The fields themselves receive one final inspection.
The farmer walks along fences, checks gates, and looks over the crops. Perhaps a section needs repair, or an animal has pushed against a barrier. These small problems are easier to solve before night completely arrives.
The farmer may also remember tomorrow's tasks while walking. Which field needs attention? Which animal requires care? Which tools need sharpening? The mind quietly prepares for another day, even as the present one begins to fade.
The countryside now looks different from the bright fields of midday. The sunlight has softened, long shadows stretch across the earth, and the air begins to cool.
Birds settle into the hedges while distant sounds from the village become clearer. For the farmer, this peaceful scene is also a signal that time is running short. The most urgent outdoor work must be finished soon. Darkness is approaching, and the farm is gradually preparing to become quiet for the night. As the last sunlight reaches across the fields, the farmer begins gathering anything that could be damaged overnight. Hay is moved under shelter, loose tools are collected, and useful materials are placed where rain cannot reach them.
In a world without modern storage buildings, protecting supplies required constant attention. A careless evening could mean losing something valuable to weather or animals. The farmer works steadily, knowing that tomorrow's labor depends partly.
The animals are now brought closer to the farmstead.
Oxen that worked in the fields need food and water, while cattle and sheep must be guided towards secure areas.
The farmer watches their movements carefully because a frightened animal can become difficult to control in fading light. Familiar sounds and routines help keep everything calm. After a long day of labor, even the animals seem ready for the quiet shelter of the farmyard and the simple comfort of rest.
Before leaving the fields completely, the farmer takes one final look at the crops. The plants are still, moving gently when the evening wind passes through them. There is no guarantee that the harvest will succeed.
Too much rain, too little rain, insects, disease, or an unexpected storm could change everything. Yet the farmer can do only what experience allows. For tonight, the crops are left beneath the sky, while the farmer turns toward the more immediate needs of the household. Back near the farmhouse, evening chores continue.
Water may need to be carried, animals fed, and simple food prepared for the family.
Children or other household members may help with smaller tasks, making the final hours before darkness a shared effort.
The farm does not suddenly become quiet when the sun disappears.
Instead, the work moves indoors.
Outside, the fields rest beneath the growing darkness while the household prepares for its evening meal.
The farmer finally closes a gate and hears the familiar sounds of animals settling nearby. The day's outdoor labor is almost finished. Dust remains on clothing, the hands are rough, and the body feels the weight of countless movements.
Yet there is a quiet satisfaction in seeing the animals safely sheltered and the tools stored. Another day has passed without disaster.
For a medieval farmer, that simple fact is worth appreciating before the darkness fully settles over the countryside. Inside the farmhouse, the atmosphere begins to change.
The day's outdoor work has ended, but the household still has responsibilities. Someone may prepare the evening meal while another person checks stored food, gathers water, or tends the fire. Children can help with smaller chores as they learn the routines of rural life.
The house becomes warmer and brighter as the fire grows. Outside, darkness continues spreading across the fields, slowly hiding the places where the farmer worked all day. The evening meal is usually simple, built around whatever the household has available. Bread, pottage, vegetables, beans, cheese, or preserved foods may appear on the table.
There is little reason to waste precious supplies. Food must last beyond tonight, because tomorrow and the days after that are already waiting.
After hours of physical work, however, Even a humble bowl of warm food can feel comforting. The family eats while the countryside outside becomes increasingly quiet. For the farmer, this may be the first real opportunity of the day to sit without watching a field or an animal. The fire gives warmth, the meal provides comfort, and familiar voices fill the small room. Stories may be shared, simple questions asked, and tomorrow's work discussed. There is nothing grand about the evening, but that is exactly what makes it peaceful. After a day shaped by soil, weather, and animals, the household finally gathers together under one roof. Yet tomorrow's work is never completely forgotten. The farmer may already be thinking about which field needs attention, whether an animal requires special care, or which tool needs repairing. Medieval life moved according to repeating cycles. One day flowed into another, and the tasks of the farm returned with remarkable regularity. The farmer did not need a written schedule to remember everything. The seasons, the land, and years of experience had already taught the household what needed. Outside, the last traces of daylight disappear. The fields that were busy only hours earlier are now dark and silent. The animals settle into their shelters, while the farmhouse closed softly against the night. Inside, the farmer's body finally begins to relax after a long day of physical work. There is still a little conversation beside the fire, but the pace is slower now. The darkness has arrived, and with it comes the quietest part of the medieval farmer's day. The fire slowly becomes the center of the farmhouse. Its soft light reaches across wooden walls while the family settles into the evening. Outside, the temperature continues to fall, but inside there is warmth and familiar company. The farmer may remove dusty clothing, wash tired hands, and finally sit after hours of movement. There is no entertainment screen or electric light waiting nearby. The simple glow of the fire is enough to fill the room with a quiet sense of comfort. Before sleep, the household may still complete a few practical tasks. Food must be covered, animals checked once more, and the fire managed carefully so it does not become dangerous. Valuable belongings are kept close, while doors and entrances are secured. Night brings different concerns from daytime. Darkness makes travel difficult and can hide animals, strangers, or other dangers. The family therefore remains close to the farmhouse, allowing the quiet countryside to settle completely. The farmer's body is now beginning to feel the full weight of the day. Shoulders are sore from guiding tools, hands are rough from work, and legs have carried the farmer across fields for hours. Yet tomorrow will bring many of the same responsibilities. There is little chance of escaping the agricultural cycle. The farmer knows this without needing to say it. The seasons continue, the crops continue growing, and the work continues with them, year after year. As the household prepares for sleep, the sounds outside become softer. Animals shift inside their shelters. The wind moves through the trees, and somewhere in the distance another farmhouse may still have a small fire glowing. The medieval countryside is not completely silent, but it is much quieter than the modern world. There are no engines, traffic lights, or distant highways. For a moment, the farmer can simply listen to the darkness and allow the day's worries to become still. Eventually, the fire becomes lower and the farmhouse grows darker. Another day of medieval farming has finally ended. From the first pale light before sunrise to this quiet moment beside the dying fire, nearly every hour has been shaped by work, weather, animals, and survival. Tomorrow, the farmer will rise and begin again. But tonight, beneath the dark medieval sky, the fields can rest, the animals can sleep, and the tired farmer can finally close their eyes. Imagine stepping inside a medieval farmhouse just after sunset. Outside, the fields have disappeared into darkness, while inside, one small fire provides nearly all the warmth and light the family will have. There are no electric lamps, glowing screens, or heated rooms waiting for them. The farmer has worked since before sunrise, and now the household begins its quiet nighttime routine. Tonight, we leave the fields behind and enter the simple world where a medieval farming family finally rests. The farmhouse is usually a practical place rather than a comfortable modern home. Depending on the region and period, buildings could be made from timber, earth, stone, thatch, or combinations of these materials. The interior might contain only a few essential possessions: a cooking area, simple furniture, storage containers, tools, and sleeping spaces all share the same limited environment. Every object has a purpose, because there is little room for things that do not help the household. The fire is especially important after dark. It provides warmth for the family, helps with cooking, and offers the main source of light during the evening. Keeping it burning safely requires attention. Too little fire means cold and darkness,
while an uncontrolled fire can threaten the entire home.
The farmer and family therefore treat the hearth with care.
Its gentle glow fills the room, creating a small island of warmth while the dark countryside surrounds the farmhouse outside.
After the evening meal, the family may spend some time talking quietly beside the fire.
Stories, memories, local news, and plans for tomorrow can fill the room.
Without modern entertainment, conversation becomes an important part of household life.
Someone may repair clothing, prepare tools, spin fibber, or complete another small task while listening.
The evening is not completely idle. Even during moments of rest, medieval families often find simple ways to make useful progress before sleep.
Eventually, the farmhouse grows quieter.
The fire burns lower, voices become softer, and the farmer's exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore.
After a day spent working the land, caring for animals, and preparing for tomorrow, sleep is no longer difficult to imagine. Outside, the fields lie beneath the stars, while inside, the family prepares for another night.
For a few peaceful hours, the farm can finally become still, waiting patiently for the first light of another medieval morning. The sleeping area is usually simple, with little separation between everyday living and nighttime rest.
Depending on the household, family members may sleep on straw-filled mattresses, simple beds, or other basic bedding. Privacy is limited compared with modern life, and several people may share the same general sleeping space. After a long day of physical labor, however, comfort becomes less important than simply having somewhere warm and reasonably safe to close the eyes.
The darkness outside also changes how the farmhouse feels. Without electric lighting, every movement depends on the small amount of light produced by the hearth or a simple candle or lamp. Shadows fill the corners of the room, and the familiar objects of daytime become difficult to see.
The farmer knows the house well enough to move around carefully, but nighttime remains a very different experience from the bright, illuminated world modern people know today. Before settling down, the family may make sure the remaining fire is safe and that important belongings are protected.
Food is stored away, doors or entrances are secured, and animals outside are checked when necessary.
These small routines help prepare the household for the night.
Nothing is automatic. Each responsibility depends on someone remembering to do it.
Once everything is finally in order, the farmhouse can become quieter, and the family can begin preparing their simple.
The sounds of the night become easier to notice once conversation stops. The wind may move through the thatch, animals may shift outside, and insects or distant creatures can make unfamiliar noises. For a modern listener, these sounds might feel mysterious. To the medieval farmer, they are part of ordinary life. Years of living close to the land would teach people which sounds were normal and which ones might require attention.
Even silence itself could become something worth listening to.
The farmer finally lies down after a day that began long before sunrise. The body is tired from walking, lifting, bending, guiding animals, and working the soil.
There is no alarm clock waiting for the morning, but the farmer already knows that sleep will be temporary. The work of the farm follows the rising sun.
For now, though, the room is warm. The day's responsibilities are finished, and the quiet darkness offers a few precious hours of rest. As the farmhouse settles into darkness, the family begins to experience a world ruled by natural light. The small fire may glow softly for a while, but eventually even that light becomes weaker.
The room grows still, and ordinary objects disappear into shadow.
Outside, the fields are completely dark.
For a medieval farmer, nighttime was not simply daytime without sunlight.
It created a different world, one where movement became slower, sounds became more important, and the safest place. The temperature inside the farmhouse could also change noticeably after the fire was reduced.
During colder seasons, warmth was precious, and families depended on the hearth, clothing, bedding, and the warmth of other people nearby.
Thick walls or thatched roofs could provide some protection, but they could not create the steady indoor temperature modern homes provide. After spending the day outside, the farmer might welcome even a modest amount of warmth before finally settling beneath.
Sleep itself could be interrupted by the sounds of the household. Animals might move outside, someone might wake to tend the fire, or a child could stir during the night.
The farmhouse was a shared environment, so complete silence and privacy were unusual.
Yet after many hours of exhausting work, the farmer could often return to sleep quickly. The body had spent the entire day using energy, and darkness offered the natural signal that it was finally time to recover.
The night also gave the farmer a rare opportunity to escape the demands of the fields.
There was nothing left to plow, no crops to inspect, and no tools that needed immediate use.
For several hours, the land could simply wait. The farmer could lie still and listen to the wind moving outside.
Somewhere beyond the walls, the animals continued their quiet routines.
The farm remained alive, but the human work had paused, creating a peaceful gap before another morning arrived.
Eventually, the farmhouse becomes almost completely silent.
The fire gives only a faint glow. The animals have settled, and the family rests in the darkness.
Above the roof, the same stars that watched over countless medieval villages remain visible in the night sky.
The farmer does not know what tomorrow will bring: rain, sunshine, difficult soil, healthy crops, or unexpected trouble.
But tonight, for a few quiet hours, there is nothing left to do. The countryside can finally sleep.
Hours pass quietly inside the farmhouse, and the deep darkness outside makes the world feel distant. The farmer lies beneath simple bedding while the house slowly cools around the fading hearth. Somewhere nearby, an animal shifts its weight, and the soft sound disappears into the night.
There is nothing demanding attention now.
The fields can wait until morning. For the farmer, this is one of the few moments when the body can completely surrender to rest after a day of physical labor. Sleep in the medieval countryside was closely connected to the natural rhythm of the seasons. Long summer days offered more time for outdoor work, while winter darkness arrived much earlier. The farmer's daily schedule therefore changed with the amount of daylight available. There was no artificial world keeping people awake late into the night. When darkness became deep and work was finished, the farmhouse naturally became a place for rest, conversation, and sleep beneath the quiet night sky. The farmer may wake briefly during the night, listening to the familiar sounds around the house.
A restless animal. A gust of wind or rain against the roof could interrupt the sleep for a moment. Yet the darkness outside remains peaceful.
There is nowhere urgent to travel and no distant city demanding attention.
The farmer simply settles back into the bedding, allowing tiredness to return.
Beyond the walls, the fields wait silently beneath the stars, untouched until another morning.
Eventually, the final warmth of the hearth becomes faint, and the farmhouse rests almost completely in darkness.
The farmer's breathing becomes slow and steady after the exhausting day. Nearby, family members sleep in the same quiet space, while animals remain sheltered outside. Nothing about the scene is luxurious, but there is a certain simplicity to it. The modern world has disappeared entirely.
There are no screens, engines, notifications, or artificial lights, only darkness, breathing.
And then, slowly, the night begins to give way to another morning.
A faint change in the darkness appears beyond the farmhouse, almost impossible to notice at first.
The farmer is still asleep, unaware that another day of ploughing, feeding, repairing, and working the land is approaching. The medieval countryside has completed its quiet cycle. For one final peaceful moment, everything remains still.
Soon the first light will return, and the farmer's ancient routine will begin again.
Imagine waking before sunrise, looking outside, and realizing that the entire future of your family depends on what the weather decides to do.
A medieval farmer could work from dawn until dusk and still lose everything to drought, frost, flooding, or a violent storm. There were no modern forecasts to provide certainty.
The farmer had only experience, observation, and patience.
In this chapter, we slowly follow the ancient agricultural year and discover how every season shaped a farmer's life.
Spring was a season of hope, but it was also a time of intense work.
The soil had to be prepared, tools repaired, animals made ready, and seeds carefully placed into the ground.
A farmer watched the weather closely, waiting for conditions that were suitable for planting.
Every seed represented future food, so wasting them could be dangerous.
As green shoots slowly appeared, the farmer could finally see the first signs that months of hard work might eventually become a successful harvest. Summer brought longer days and a growing sense of urgency.
Crops needed attention while weeds had to be controlled and animals cared for.
The sun provided more hours for work, but heat could make physical labor exhausting. A farmer might spend most of the daylight outside, moving between fields and livestock.
The countryside could look beautiful during these months, filled with green crops and warm sunlight. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance was constant pressure to protect everything growing. Autumn was perhaps the most important season of all because the harvest finally arrived. Months of uncertainty were concentrated into a short period when crops had to be gathered, processed, and stored. Grain needed careful handling, vegetables had to be collected, and animals might be prepared for the coming winter.
Rain at the wrong moment could cause serious losses. Farmers therefore worked long hours, knowing that every successful harvest would determine how much food and security. Then came winter, when the fields became quieter and daylight grew short.
Outdoor work slowed, But survival did not become effortless. Stored food had to last, animals needed feeding, tools required repair, and fuel had to be carefully managed.
The farmer could finally spend more time indoors, but every remaining supply mattered.
Winter was a test of preparation. The work done during spring, summer, and autumn now returned as one simple question: had the family gathered enough to make it safely? As spring advances, the farmer begins watching the young crops almost every day.
Tiny green shoots may look fragile against the wide fields, yet they carry enormous importance. Weeds must be removed, animals kept away, and damaged areas repaired. A farmer cannot simply plant seeds and walk away. The growing season requires constant attention.
Slowly, the empty brown earth begins to change, and with each new leaf comes a little more hope that the coming harvest will be enough.
Summer can turn the farm into a place of relentless activity. Longer daylight means more hours available for work, but the heat can drain the farmer's strength.
Crops need protection, animals need water, and hay may need to be gathered for winter.
The farmer moves from one responsibility to another while the sun travels across the sky.
Even during the warmest and brightest part of the year, there is little opportunity to forget that winter will eventually return.
When the first signs of harvest appear, the farmer begins thinking differently about the fields.
Golden green means months of work are finally becoming something tangible.
But harvesting must happen at the right time. Waiting too long could expose crops to wind, rain, birds, or other damage. Working too early could mean gathering grain before it is fully ready.
The farmer therefore watches carefully, relying on experience to recognize the moment when the crop is ready to leave the field. Harvest season transforms the countryside. Families work together, cutting crops, gathering bundles, carrying loads, and storing what has been collected. The work can continue for long hours because good weather cannot be taken for granted. A clear morning may become cloudy by afternoon, and everyone knows that rain could complicate the harvest. Despite the exhaustion, there is also a quiet feeling of relief. After months of uncertainty, food is finally being brought safely closer.
Once the harvest is gathered, the farmer turns attention towards storage.
Grain must be protected from moisture, pests, and animals, while other foods require different methods of preservation. Storage is almost as important as harvesting because a year's food can be lost after it has already been collected. The farmer checks containers, buildings, and supplies carefully. Every sack, basket, and bundle represents future meals, making the storage area one of the most important places.
As autumn deepens, the farmer begins preparing for the colder months. Hay is gathered for livestock, firewood is collected, and stored foods are carefully counted.
Every bundle matters because winter can last for months. The farmer knows that supplies cannot simply be replaced once the fields become quiet.
Preparation therefore becomes its own kind of work. The countryside may appear peaceful, but inside the farmhouse, people are quietly calculating how long their food fuel. Winter arrives gradually, changing the appearance of the farm.
Fields that once held green or golden crops become bare, muddy, or covered with frost. Outdoor work does not disappear completely, but the rhythm becomes slower. Animals still need feeding. Fences still require attention, and wood must be brought inside for the fire.
The farmer spends more time near the farmhouse, repairing tools and equipment while waiting for the return of longer days and workable soil. Cold weather also changes what the family eats. Fresh foods become less common, while stored grain, dried legumes, preserved vegetables, cheese, and other foods become increasingly important. Every meal reminds the household of the harvest that came before.
A successful autumn means more generous supplies, while a poor harvest creates difficult choices. Winter therefore reveals the true value of careful farming.
The food eaten beside the fire may have been planted, harvested. During winter, the farmer may finally have more time for repairs and preparation.
Wooden handles can be replaced, iron blades sharpened, fences repaired, and clothing mended.
These tasks may seem small compared with ploughing a field, but they prepare the household for the next agricultural cycle. By the fire, the farmer slowly restores the tools that will soon return outdoors. Even in the quietest season, the next year's work is already beginning in small, almost invisible ways. As winter continues, the farmer watches the changing sky and waits for signs of spring. The days slowly become longer. Sunlight returns, and the earth gradually begins to soften.
The cycle is turning again.
Soon animals will return to wider pastures, fields will need preparation, and seeds will once more disappear beneath the soil. The farmer has survived another winter, but there is no long pause to celebrate.
The same land that provided food last year is already asking for another season.
The first warmer days bring small changes that the farmer notices immediately.
Snow and frost begin to disappear. The soil becomes easier to work, and the first signs of new growth return.
Animals can spend more time outside, while stored food slowly becomes less important.
The farmer checks old tools, prepares the fields, and begins thinking about planting once again. After months of waiting, the countryside is waking up, and another agricultural year is quietly beginning. The farmer knows that the new season will demand almost everything once again.
Seeds must be selected carefully, fields prepared, animals organized, and work planned around the weather.
Nothing is guaranteed.
A promising spring can still lead to a poor harvest months later, yet the farmer begins anyway, because agriculture depends on continuing the cycle despite uncertainty.
The first seed placed into the earth is therefore both a practical act and a quiet expression of hope for the year ahead. Looking back across the entire year, the farmer's life seems almost completely connected to the land. Spring brings planting, summer brings growth and preparation, autumn brings harvest, and winter brings waiting and repair.
Each season carries different responsibilities, but none can truly be separated from the others.
A decision made in one season may affect the household many months later. Medieval farming is therefore not a collection of separate jobs, but one continuous cycle of effort.
For a modern American listener, it can be difficult to imagine living according to such a strict natural rhythm. Today, food can arrive from distant places at almost any time of year, and artificial light allows people to work long after sunset. The medieval farmer had none of this. Life followed daylight, weather, soil, animals, and seasons. The result was a slower existence, but not an easier one. Every meal carried the memory of countless hours spent working with the land.
And as another spring begins, the farmer stands once more at the edge of the field. The earth is waiting, the animals are ready, and the tools are prepared.
Soon, another seed will disappear beneath the soil, beginning the cycle again. Nothing about the process is guaranteed, yet the farmer continues with quiet determination.
For generations, people live this way, season after season, trusting experience and patience. The fields remain silent for a moment before the first new work.
Imagine walking into a medieval village just as the sun begins to rise.
Before you see the castle or hear the church bell, you notice something more important: the farmers. Their fields surround the settlement, their animals fill the yards, and nearly every household depends on the harvest.
But a farmer does not live alone.
Behind every field is a community of neighbors, craftsmen, families, and local traditions. Tonight, we quietly enter that village and discover how ordinary farmers fit into. The medieval village was often a busy place despite its small size.
Farmers moved between their homes, fields, grazing areas, and shared spaces throughout the day.
A blacksmith might be repairing a plow while a carpenter worked on wooden equipment nearby. Someone else could be selling bread, preparing food, or caring for animals.
Most people had different responsibilities, but their lives were connected. A farmer depended on these other workers just as they depended on the farmer's crops. Neighbors could become especially important when difficult work arrived. Planting and harvesting sometimes required more hands than a single household could provide.
Families might work together, share equipment, or help one another complete urgent tasks. Cooperation did not mean life was always peaceful, but rural communities often depended on practical relationships.
When the weather threatened a harvest, having another pair of hands could make an enormous difference. The farmer also had to interact with local markets. Surplus grain, eggs, animals, wool, vegetables, or other goods could sometimes be exchanged or sold for things the household could not produce itself. A farmer might need iron tools from a blacksmith, cloth from a weaver, or other necessities from local traders. The village therefore functioned like a small network of exchange. Every household produced something useful, and the daily life of the community depended on these quiet connections. As evening approaches, the village begins to slow down. Farmers return from the fields, animals are guided home, and smoke rises gently from household fires.
The day's work has created the food, materials, and goods that keep the community alive.
From a modern perspective, the village may seem incredibly small.
Yet within these few homes exists an entire world of work, trade, cooperation, and tradition. And tomorrow, before sunrise, the same village will quietly begin its rhythm all over again.
The village church often stood as an important part of community life. Its bells could mark the passing of the day, calling people toward worship and reminding them of gatherings or important events. For farmers, The church was not simply a building visited occasionally. It could be one of the few places where people from different households regularly came together. After days spent working in separate fields, the church offered a shared space where villagers could see one another. The village also had its own sounds. Chickens called from farmyards, carts moved along rough paths, animals made their familiar noises, and tools struck wood or iron. Voices carried surprisingly far across open fields. Without engines or modern traffic, these ordinary sounds became the natural soundtrack of rural life. A farmer could often recognize where a sound was coming from simply by hearing it. The village was small, but it was rarely completely silent during daylight. Paths connecting the village to surrounding fields were essential.
Farmers used them to move animals, carry tools, transport crops, and reach neighboring settlements.
After heavy rain, these paths could become muddy and difficult to travel. In dry weather, dust could rise beneath the feet of people and animals. Every journey required more effort than it would today.
Yet these simple paths connected the farmer's home to the fields, the market, the church, and the wider world beyond the village.
Not every day was peaceful or predictable.
A poor harvest could affect many households at once, especially if food prices increased or stored supplies became limited.
Bad weather could damage crops across an entire region.
Farmers therefore paid close attention to what was happening beyond their own fields.
The success of one household was connected to the condition of the wider countryside.
In a world without modern transportation or large food networks, local shortages could become serious. Despite these uncertainties, village life also contained moments of simple pleasure. People could gather during religious festivals, seasonal celebrations, markets, or other community events.
Music, food, conversation, and familiar faces offered a welcome break from routine labor.
For a farmer who spent much of the year thinking about crops and animals, these gatherings could provide a rare change of pace.
The medieval village was certainly demanding, but it was also a place where generations.
As evening settles over the village, the farmer's connection to the community becomes especially visible.
Carts return along the narrow paths, animals are guided toward their shelters, and smoke begins rising from household fires. Neighbors may exchange a few words before entering their homes. There is no need for long conversations. After a full day of work, even a brief greeting can be enough to remind everyone that they are part of the same small community.
Inside each home, families prepare their evening meals using the food they have stored or produced.
The farmer's work in the fields now becomes food on the table. Grain may become bread or porridge, while vegetables, beans, cheese, or preserved foods provide additional nourishment.
The connection is direct.
What was planted months earlier, protected through summer, and gathered during harvest is now quietly feeding the household.
The entire agricultural year is reflected in one simple.
Village life also depended on shared knowledge. Farmers learned from parents, neighbors, and generations of experience. They knew when certain crops should be planted, which animals were difficult to handle, and how local weather usually behaved. This knowledge was rarely written in detailed manuals.
Instead, it was remembered, demonstrated, and passed from one generation to the next. A young farmer learned not only by listening, but by standing beside older workers and watching how they.
Children were part of this world from an early age. As they grew, they could gradually take on simple responsibilities around the household and farm. They might help gather eggs, carry small amounts of water, watch animals, collect materials, or assist with other daily tasks.
Through these ordinary activities, they slowly learned the skills their future depended upon.
Childhood was therefore closely connected to the rhythms of the household, with lessons often hidden inside everyday work. As night grows deeper, the medieval village becomes quieter. The paths that were busy during the day are nearly empty. The animals have settled, and warm light flickers from small homes. Beyond the village, the fields stretch into darkness, waiting for another morning. The farmer has returned home, but the community remains connected through the same land and the same changing seasons. In this quiet moment, the village feels small, peaceful, and almost completely separated from the modern world.
Before the night becomes completely still, the farmer may think about the people who helped make the day's work possible. The blacksmith who repaired a blade, the neighbor who helped with a difficult task, the family that traded food or materials. Each played a small part in village life.
No household existed entirely on its own.
Behind the farmer's work stood a network of people whose skills and labor quietly supported one another.
The village also carried memories from one generation to another. Older people knew which fields flooded after heavy rain, where animals could safely graze, and how previous generations had survived difficult winters. Younger farmers listened, watched, and gradually absorbed this knowledge. In this way, the countryside itself became a kind of living classroom.
Lessons were not written on screens or printed in books.
They were carried through voices, habits, and years of experience. As the fire burns inside the farmhouse, the farmer can finally forget the fields for a few hours. Tomorrow there will be more work, but tonight the village is quiet. Somewhere nearby, another family is doing almost the same thing, eating a simple meal, talking softly, and preparing for sleep. Across the countryside, thousands of small households follow similar rhythms.
Their individual lives are different, yet the same seasons and agricultural routines connect them all.
For a modern American listener, this kind of village life can feel almost impossibly distant. Today, a farmer can use machines, weather forecasts, refrigeration, transportation, and modern markets. The medieval farmer had none of these conveniences.
Yet the basic purpose remained familiar: grow food, care for animals, protect the household, and prepare for tomorrow.
Beneath all the differences, the desire to create a safe and sustainable life connected these farmers to people living. And now the medieval village finally settles into complete darkness. The church stands quietly, the fields stretch beyond the homes, and the animals rest in their shelters. One by one, the small fires inside the houses become dim. The farmer lies down knowing that another day will begin with the first light. Nothing dramatic happens.
And perhaps that is what makes the scene so peaceful. For generations, ordinary people lived this quiet cycle: work, rest, seasons, and community one day at a time. Imagine spending an entire year growing food for your family, only to watch a single storm destroy it in a few hours.
For a medieval farmer, this was not a story from a history book.
It was a possibility that returned every season. There were no modern weather forecasts, crop insurance policies, or emergency food deliveries.
The farmer could work harder, but could never completely control nature. Tonight, we quietly explore the fears that followed a medieval farmer from spring planting.
Weather was perhaps the greatest uncertainty. Too little rain could leave crops weak and dry, while too much could flood fields and damage young plants.
A sudden frost could arrive at the wrong moment and harm delicate crops. Farmers watch clouds, wind, temperature, and the condition of the soil, trying to understand what might happen next. Generations of experience helped, but experience could never guarantee a good season. The sky always had the final decision.
A poor harvest could affect the entire household.
Grain was especially important because it could become bread, porridge, or other staple foods. If less grain was gathered than expected, families had to make their supplies last longer. Meals might become simpler, portions smaller, and stored food more carefully protected.
The farmer could look at the remaining sacks and quietly wonder how long they would last.
Hunger was not always immediate. Sometimes it arrived slowly as supplies disappeared. Farmers also had to worry about disease among their animals. An illness affecting cattle, sheep, pigs, or chickens could remove an important source of food, materials, or labor.
Losing an ox could be particularly serious because the animal's strength was essential for heavy farm work.
Without modern veterinary care, farmers relied heavily on observation, traditional knowledge, and prevention.
A healthy animal was therefore something worth protecting carefully because its value extended.
And yet, despite all these uncertainties, the farmer continued working. Seeds still had to be planted, fields prepared, animals fed, and tools repaired. There was no choice but to continue the cycle. Each morning brought another opportunity to do what could be done.
Perhaps the weather would remain kind. Perhaps the harvest would be enough.
In the quiet rhythm of medieval farming, hope was rarely loud or dramatic. It was simply the decision to wake up tomorrow and begin again. One of the quietest fears was simply not knowing what tomorrow would bring. A farmer could inspect the fields in the morning and see healthy crops, then return after a storm to find them damaged. Nature could change the situation without warning. This uncertainty made planning difficult. Farmers stored food, repaired tools, protected animals, and prepared for winter because preparation was one of the few forms of control available to them. Rain could be both a blessing and a threat.
A gentle rainfall could revive dry soil and help crops grow, while several days of heavy rain could turn fields into mud.
If water remained standing too long, crops could suffer and farm work could become nearly impossible. The farmer therefore learned to appreciate rain without ever completely trusting it.
Looking toward dark clouds could bring relief, but it could also bring a quiet feeling of worry.
Drought created a different kind of problem. Without enough water, crops could become weak, pasture could dry out, and animals might struggle to find enough fresh food. The farmer could work the soil and protect the plants, but there was little that could be done when the sky refused to provide rain. Days of clear sunshine might look beautiful to someone passing through the countryside. To the farmer, however, endless blue skies could become increasingly frightening. Even a successful harvest did not completely remove uncertainty. Food had to survive storage without being ruined by moisture, pests, animals, or other problems. Grain could be lost after it had already been gathered. Preserved foods could deteriorate. A farmer therefore continued watching supplies long after the harvest celebrations had ended. The year's work was never truly finished when the crops left the field. Protecting what had been collected was another part of surviving the winter. When winter finally arrived, the farmer could feel the weight of every decision made during the warmer months. The amount of grain stored, the hay prepared for animals, and the condition of the tools all mattered now. A household with good preparation could face the cold with greater confidence. A household with poor supplies faced difficult choices. Winter therefore became a quiet test of planning. The fields were resting beneath the cold sky, but inside the farmhouse, survival depended. Sometimes the greatest fear was not a single disaster, but several small problems arriving together. A poor harvest could be followed by a sick animal, damaged tools, or an unusually cold winter. Each problem might seem manageable on its own, but together they could place enormous pressure on a household. The farmer therefore had to think beyond today's needs. Every saved sack of grain, healthy animal, and repaired tool could become important when circumstances suddenly became difficult. Families also depended heavily on cooperation during difficult periods. A neighbor might lend a tool, help repair a fence, share information about weather, or assist with urgent farm work. These relationships could become especially valuable when one household suffered a setback. Rural life was demanding, but people did not always face every difficulty completely alone. The village itself could provide a small network of practical support, built through years of shared work. There was also the fear of losing valuable working animals. An ox was not merely another creature in the farmyard. It could provide the strength needed to prepare the fields, transport heavy loads, and complete demanding work. If an ox became seriously ill, the farmer might suddenly face tasks that were much harder to accomplish. This made animal health a constant concern. Every morning, the farmer had reason to notice whether the animals looked strong, active, and ready for another day. The farmer also had to think about the condition of the land itself. Soil could become exhausted, fields could become waterlogged, and repeated cultivation could create long-term problems. Farmers developed practical methods suited to their local environments, including leaving some land fallow and rotating crops in ways that could help maintain productivity. These methods were not perfect, but they reflected generations of observation. The farmer was not simply fighting nature, and perhaps that is what makes the medieval farmer's story so remarkable. There was so little certainty, yet the work continued. Every seed was placed into uncertain soil. Every animal was cared for despite the possibility of illness. Every harvest was gathered with the knowledge that the next season could be different. The farmer could not control the weather or guarantee the future. What remained possible was preparation, patience. As the seasons passed, the farmer learned that fear could never completely disappear. Instead, it became part of the rhythm of rural life. A cloudy morning could bring questions. An unusually warm winter could create concern. A sudden cold night could threaten young plants. Yet experience taught the farmer not to panic at every change. Nature was unpredictable, but patterns could still be observed. The farmer watched, waited, and adjusted, using whatever knowledge had been. There were also moments when nature offered reassurance. A gentle rain after a dry period could transform the fields within days. Healthy animals, strong young crops, and full storage rooms could make the future feel a little safer. These small signs mattered deeply. A medieval farmer had few guarantees, so even ordinary good fortune could feel meaningful. A field growing well was not simply beautiful to look at. It was a quiet promise that the household might have enough when winter arrived. By the end of a difficult season, the farmer could look back and understand how many things had happened beyond human control. Some crops had survived, others had failed. Some animals remained healthy, while others may have been lost. Yet the household continued because people adapted. They saved what they could, repaired what could be repaired, and prepared for another season. Survival was rarely one dramatic victory. It was a long series of small decisions made day after day. And perhaps the most remarkable part was the farmer's ability to continue hoping. After a poor harvest, another spring would still come. Seeds would still be placed into the earth,
Animals would still be cared for.
Fields would still be prepared.
The farmer knew that failure was possible, but giving up was not an option.
In that sense, every new planting season represented a quiet act of courage, the willingness to begin again despite everything that had happened before.
Tonight, as the medieval countryside becomes quiet, the farmer finally rests. The future remains uncertain, just as it always has been.
Beyond the farmhouse, the fields lie beneath the dark sky, waiting for rain, sunlight, and another season.
There are no guarantees, only preparation and patience. And somewhere between the last embers of the fire and the first light of morning, the farmer sleeps trusting that tomorrow will bring another chance to work the land, care for the household,